You all set, Andrew?
I'm ready to roll.
All right, good evening, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started with this evening's program. Welcome, everybody. I see a lot of familiar faces, but just in case for those who don't know me, my name is Kevin Pollock. I'm a site manager with the Prince William Office of Historic Preservation, and this is part of our, I hesitate to say winter lecture series, because I don't think any of the days we've had a program that's felt like winter at all, but it is technically part of our winter lecture series. So thank you all for joining us for this installment of the lecture series. We do still have one program left in this series. That's going to be next month, again, the fourth Thursday of the month, right here at 7 p.m. And it's going to be historian and author Bob Sutton presenting Nazis on the Potomac, about a local World War II prisoner of war camp. So that will be May 25th, right back here at 7 o'clock. A few other programs to highlight. We're getting out into being able to do things outdoors again in the nice weather. So we are kicking up with some historic walks that we have going on at some of our historic sites. At Bristow Station Battlefield, our Wednesday walk programs will begin next Wednesday, May 3rd. Those are all free programs at 7 p.m. as well. And we do those the first Wednesday of each month, May through October. And then we also have some of our walking tours of historic Prince William towns. The first one will be May 19th at Buck Hall. Don't worry, you don't have to remember all of this. We have flyers right out there for you in case you need those, and pick those up on your way out. One last thing I will mention, a neat new program that we are doing at Williams Ordinary, our main office down in Dumfries. We're doing an 18th century tavern experience that's going to be co-hosted by Water's End Brewery and Dixie Bones Barbecue. That's going to be held on June 10th. From 12 to 5, it's a free event. And then from 6 to 9 p.m., it is a ticketed and 21 or older event as well. So two different programs going on within the same day, but there's a flyer out on the table for those who are interested in that. I'm going to go on to tonight's program, which I'm very excited about. For all of the other lectures that we've had so far as a part of the series, we've looked way back to the Civil War, and in some cases beyond and just after the Civil War, but this will be a little bit more of a recent history. And Andrew Painter is going to be our presenter for that tonight. So Andrew works in the Walsh-Colucci's Land Use and Zoning Practice Group, where he focuses on securing zoning entitlements across Northern Virginia, including Arlington County, the city of Falls Church, Fairfax County, Loudoun County, the city of Fairfax, and the town of Leesburg. Andrew advises clients on all aspects of the land entitlement process and real estate matters, and frequently appears before planning commissions, local governing bodies, and citizen organizations. Prior to joining Walsh-Colucci in 2007, Andrew worked for 2 members of the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors, the county administrator of Caroline County, Virginia, and former Virginia Governor, now U.S. Senator Mark Warner. Andrew spent much time traveling and writing about the region's land development history, and has served as an adjunct professor at the University of Richmond and the University of Mary Washington, his alma mater. Andrew is also the author of a 2018 book chronicling the history of the Virginia wine industry, Virginia Wine, 4 Centuries of Change, published by George Mason University Press and distributed by the University of Virginia Press. Tonight, Andrew is going to be condensing a 3-hour program into a shorter time span this evening, but covering a lot of ground with his talk, Rise of the Region, a Developmental History of Northern Virginia. So please join me in welcoming Andrew.
Thanks, appreciate it. All right. Okay. All right, the first 300 slides are the best of all of them. Yeah. Yeah, thanks a lot. It is a pleasure to be here. This time of year, being able to just drive down, Grant Avenue. It's a lovely town. Manassas really is. And just a few months ago, I dropped my children and my wife off at the train station to head over to the Greenbrier, because it drops you off right there at the hotel. And it was right in the middle of winter, and I got to tell you, it was like a picture perfect, like a Hallmark movie. It was just beautiful. I've always said that Prince William County, of all the 95 counties in Virginia, I think it is the most varied in terms of landscape. You have tidewater areas, that's east of 95. You got Piedmont area, and then over at its western boundary with the Bull Run Mountains, you got a bit of ridge and valley too. But no county has that, not one, aside from Prince William. So there's a lot to love in this county. This is a lecture that I put together a number of years ago against the wishes of my wife, who wishes that I spent time with her and our family. But I went ahead and did it. I was asked to do it by an educational group, and I have a very, not a photographic memory, but I have a memory of things that I remember and that I want to remember, obviously. And I said, if anyone's going to give this lecture, I want it to be me. So I took the time. I tried to recall all my thoughts and feelings and memories of growing up here in Northern Virginia and encapsulating them into what was a 2-hour lecture. And as I've given it over the years, and I'm sure tonight will be no exception, it has grown to 3.5 hours. People have given me different vignettes, they've given me corrections, they've given me their own personal stories that I've tried to incorporate. And then it's also like triggered things, I need to include that, or I should include that. And it's just grown and grown and grown, but I've really, really enjoyed it. So I'll share with you what I can this evening as quickly as I can. Just to sort of start out with some pictures of kind of where we live. I think, history at least is really two things. In one sense, it is the color, the narrative. It's the story. It's the narrative that kind of takes you somewhere. In another sense, it's also the reason why and the explanation. And that's what history does. I think some of us are much more into the analysis and not so much fond of the stories, and the rest of us are kind of all for, want the stories. Just give me the juicy stuff. And I think it's very important to put our region's history into context. I mean, many of us just spend time in Fairfax or Arlington or Loudoun. You don't ever get a chance, you kind of grow up and live in sort of a bubble, and you don't really get a sense of like where your particular community or jurisdiction fits in the broader scheme of what we are as a region. This has been, as I've looked at it, largely a story of growth constants. I think it's important to acknowledge that the growth of our region really illustrates the vital importance of geographic proximity to the nation's capital, general economic development conditions, public sector decisions, and private sector policies, all in determining where growth should occur and how it should occur. This is also, whether you like it or not, largely a story of Fairfax County. The story of this region is largely one that's driven by Fairfax, right? It is the 8-ton gorilla that's in the room. You either like it or you hate it, for what it is. Adjacent jurisdictions, Prince William being one of them, a lot of them ended up passing policies to either try to replicate Fairfax County, to try to attract economic development and step out of the shadows of Fairfax County, or passing policies to prevent what they believe to be mistakes that Fairfax County made. Think Western Loudoun's downzoning, Spotsylvania County's downzoning, the rural Crescent, and Prince William County. But the one thing that happened in this region is that it had to be converted over the period of about 70 years from largely a rural economy into what you see today, an internationally recognized region. This is also an incomplete story. It's one of large land development and infrastructure projects, and it's a story of the changes to the physical landscape. But I discovered that there's absolutely no way that I could cover every single personality, every single zoning battle, every highway fight or subdivision. So, but as I said, it's grown from 2 hours to something more. This is also largely a story without universal acceptance, because even as prosperous as I think our region has been, many of us don't want to live anywhere else. We're proud to call Northern Virginia home. As successful as our school systems have been, and our police and fire response systems have been, and our libraries, the decisions that have resulted in our built environment have not been universally accepted or supported. It has taken the dedication of individuals, be it developers, planning commissioners, supervisors, city council members, anti-growth groups, all of which provide color to the story. So all of you, and I know you all, if you're here tonight, care about history, you all know to look beyond just the slides and what I'm saying here tonight to dig a whole bunch deeper. So with those caveats, let's kind of begin. And you guys might remember these types of bumper stickers that appeared all across, and it could be don't Fairfax Spotsylvania, don't Fairfax Loudoun. This one I like especially. This is from Richmond, RVA. And one of my friends who moved from Woodbridge down to Richmond, he's now a proud Richmonder, will never look back north up 95. But he took a picture of this and he posted it on Facebook saying, yeah. And I just said, Brian, just to let you know, you're the reason why they put that sticker there. You're from here. Don't be a hypocrite. This is from the 1984 National Geographic World Atlas. And it describes Virginia as well as it does all the other states. But it says many Northern Virginians commute home to federal jobs in Washington, returning home to several of the nation's wealthiest counties. There are 2.8 million people that live in this region, 32% of Virginia. 1.1 million live in Fairfax County alone. It's an increasingly diverse jurisdiction. We are 55% Caucasian, 12% African American, 11% Asian, 16% Hispanic or Latino. It is also a very educated region. 55% of our region has at least a bachelor's degree, which is double the amount that you see in the rest of the state and across the nation. It's an affluent region. Of the large counties, the 10 largest counties in the nation that have a population or a median household income over $100,000, the top 2 are in Northern Virginia. And the most important statistic of all, the Fairfax County Board of Zoning Appeals meets 48 times a year, which is pretty remarkable. So let's start at the beginning, and I'm going to try to maintain a general attitude of scholarly detachment, but I'm not going to shy away from editorializing where I see fit. The growth in this region, I think we can all trace it back to the early 1600s. You got familiar names like the Masons, the Washingtons, the Carters, Bull Run, Mount Vernon, Dulles International Airport. These are things that have played very large roles in the history of our nation, and they continue to play a large role in the history of our nation. It is a southern landscape in the early 1700s, dominated by plantations and the farms and the crown. The crown and parliament want to establish communities. They want to establish settled areas and things like that. And if you've studied the history of Virginia, we all know about the importance of tobacco. It was used as a way of currency. There was a tobacco inspection system that established hamlets that were accessible by river and road and by water, and those in turn encouraged new roads and ferries as planters sought the shortest route to market. Tobacco remained a very important crop all the way up to the late 1700s. You can see it on the seal of this county. And you also know, too, that tobacco cultivation eventually ruined the soil. By the mid-18th century, there were a number of typical town patterns that were being developed. For the most part, these are laid out on a very straightforward grid with streets set at right angles, usually oriented towards a riverbank. And it's the prevalence of this grid in the 18th century that was due in large part to conviction that rational order could be imposed upon nature. The grid, of course, was unimaginative, perhaps, but it did serve well the commercial life of seaport towns. And, of course, all these little towns and hamlets over time would grow into something greater. Shown here, of course, is Dumfries, which was established in the late 1740s, settled by Scottish merchants who settled around tobacco warehouses. And many of you also probably know that for about 15 years, the total tonnage that was exported from Dumfries rivaled New York in terms of shipping. Several factors, of course, led to Dumfries' demise, including the Revolutionary War. You had the erosion and siltation of the creek. Ships could no longer enter and whatnot. Right up the road at the Potomac and the Occoquan was settled in the early 1750s, originally an Indian settlement. It included grist mills and tobacco warehouses. There was a merchant's mill and an automated grist mill. But industries continue to thrive, all the way up and down the Potomac River. But again, if you've been to downtown Occoquan, you know that it is laid out on a grid pattern. Right across, sort of cat-a-corner from Occoquan is, of course, on Mason's Neck is the village of Colchester. When you're heading up Route 1 and you look towards the Potomac, right at the very bottom of that bridge, at the Route 1 bridge, is the village of Colchester. This is laid out around the same time as Occoquan. It's a tobacco port town, and it's along the old post road. And there was a ferry that was operated across the Occoquan River at that point. Only one of Colchester's buildings remain, and that's shown in the bottom right-hand corner. That's called Colchester Arms. It used to be an ordinary, and now it serves as a private dwelling. Much like what happened with Occoquan and Dumfries, there was the decline of the tobacco trade, the silting of the Occoquan River, and the diversion of most of the shipping up to Alexandria, which caused all of these communities to decline. Interior to Northern Virginia, settled around Nicholas Miner's Tavern in 1757. You have a sparse collection of communities, a sparse collection of buildings, and a little county courthouse for Loudoun County, and this becomes the village of Leesburg, the town of Leesburg. And if you've been to the intersection at King and Market, this has not changed. It looks almost identical. Later, it would become the county seat, and the courthouse would be built. Falls Church, which I call home, the city likes to trace its initial settlement back to a log house that had two huge chimneys. And on the chimneys were the numbers 1699. And so they then determined that, well, we beat everyone. We were settled in 1699. but who knows? That could have been the street address of the old house. I don't know. So, just give me a break. But the original Falls Church was built in 1734, and the present church was completed in 1767. It is really cool if you go in there to the sanctuary, and you can see scrawled up on the walls the Union Confederate names from the Civil War. That's pretty neat. All of these communities, of course, paled in comparison to Alexandria, which was settled in 1749. It was a bustling riverfront town. It was about as far up the Potomac as ocean-going vessels could go, although they could go to Georgetown. But Alexandria would become the first incorporated city in 1749. And I think we all know, if you've been to Alexandria, it's its reliance on the right angle. The plan of Alexandria is virtually indistinguishable from many other early to mid-century cities, including, it's remarkably similar to the plan of Fredericksburg. In both the Fredericksburg and the Alexandria plan, there are 7 parallel streets which lead to the river, and then you have 3 perpendicular streets which run parallel, or which are perpendicular to it. But that same grid plan of 2-acre blocks was replicated multiple times in the Mid-Atlantic, and in each of them there is a market square. And here's an image of Alexandria back in 1862. And perhaps the most fascinating thing about Alexandria's original plan was the hierarchical name of its east-west streets: King, Queen, Duke, Prince, Princess. You can also see that in downtown Dumfries, or in the town of Dumfries as well. And of course, here's what it looked like in 1836, and here is what it looks like today, kind of the same. It's very quaint and lovely, and whatnot. From around 1750 to the end of the 18th century, changes abound in Northern Virginia's lifestyle and character. You have roads being built and other forms of industry increasing. Tobacco fields spread out along a number of older Indian paths that become tobacco rolling roads. And the name Rolling Road, and we've got one right here in Manassas, evolves from the practice of packing tobacco in barrels and then rolling them down to the riverfront towns. So you can see rolling roads all across Northern Virginia, shopping malls, communities named after it, and then you can see ox roads, West Ox roads. Those are the beasts of laden that pulled the hogsheads of tobacco. You have forests being cleared for additional farmland. The Kings Highway, a portion of which is right here on this map, running in the eastern part of the county, parallel to Route 1. Kings Highway was a road that was constructed between 1650 and 1735 to connect Charleston and Boston. It was a 1,300-mile route, and you can sort of see portions of it here and there. Slaveholding increases in the late 1700s. 41% of Fairfax County's population in 1800 maintained slaves, compared to only 28% 50 years earlier. So slaveholding becomes an extremely important economic commodity, but largely this region was still a wilderness. It had very few roads, virtually little industry. What industry it had and what economic development it had came from plantations and slave labor and tobacco. The half century of, right before the Revolution was called the Golden Age of Virginia aristocracy, where you had planters living elegantly on their estates, which encompassed dozens, hundreds, and sometimes thousands of acres, the largest of which was the Ravensworth Tract, which was in what is now today central Fairfax County. Here is an image of Gunston Hall at the bottom, and Mount Vernon at the top. You can see the land holdings of Fairfax County in the around 1760 or so. Historic relationships with the Revolutionary War with Great Britain were totally severed when Virginia ceases being a part of the British Empire and enters the Union as the 10th American state. This region, I would argue, would have remained largely unexplored and unknown had it not been for George Washington's choice of a site for a capital of the new republic. In 1790, Congress passed a law permitting George Washington to select a location for our nation's capital along the Potomac River. And he selected a 10-square-mile area of land from property on both sides of the river, and went around with Benjamin Benneker, who was an astronomer. Andrew Ellicott and Benjamin Benneker went around in 10 miles increments and just put markers up at each mile. And you can still go and see right along, a lot of these markers are there still today. Most of them are, behind bars, basically, but they mark the 10 square mile prospective city. In 1846, and so this is what it was. The District of Columbia, what we now know as the District of Columbia, was actually 2 counties and 3 cities. There was Alexandria County on the Virginia side, and there was Washington County on the Maryland side. There were 3 cities: Alexandria, Georgetown, and the federal city at Washington laid out by Pierre L'Enfant. Keep in mind that all of this, what is Alexandria County, was part of Fairfax County at the time, and Alexandria was the county seat. So, of course, what ended up happening was that Fairfax County had to move its courthouse because it was no longer in Virginia, had to move it somewhere else, and a geographic location was chosen at the corner of Ox Road and Chain Bridge Road, Route, what's today Little River Turnpike, and that's where the Fairfax courthouse was set up. In 1846, land formerly belonging to Virginia was returned to the Commonwealth, and it became Alexandria County, Virginia, and the city of Alexandria was brought back in. There were economic changes that occur at the start of the 1800s, and it seemed that Northern Virginia was on the verge of a lot of prosperity. But in the decades after the American Revolution, tobacco virtually disappeared. The region's soil had been totally depleted from the overplanting of tobacco. And you had people that were now moving in from the northeastern part of the country that were bringing with them improved farming techniques, modern agricultural methods, and more Northern Virginia becomes a producer of materials and goods for the growing population around the nation's capital. Think milk, poultry, fruits and vegetables, truck farms, those types of things. There's also a series of grain mills that were set up at strategic locations where roads converge with streams. You see large commercial grist mills being converted, converting flour or meal. And they relied on the power of water to turn their wheels. Many of the mills remain remain today. A lot of them, of course, are either in private hands or they've been turned into parks. I think all of you all know about Beverly Mill right on I-66, the ruins of it. It's very sad that it burned a number of years ago. But mills were a huge part of it. There was also the canal era. Between 1786 and 1843. These were major engineering undertakings, ambitious river navigation projects to bypass the fall lines up and down the East Coast. And in Northern Virginia in particular, and in the DC area, we have a number of different canals. You have the C&O Canal that provided, linking the Potomac River around DC with the headwaters of the Potomac going all the way out into the Ohio Valley and the Ohio River. These were huge mass transit projects. And they had been constructed by states and by private entrepreneurs, but there were few, if any, precedents anywhere aside from ancient Rome and Egypt that had this level of it. What's interesting is that this image right here is looking from Georgetown into Roslyn. Okay, so Virginia's right here. This is the Aqueduct Bridge. The current Key Bridge kind of runs right here. And you can see the bases of the former Aqueduct Bridge. But what would happen is, as the boats would come down to Washington, they would then hop over the Aqueduct Bridge and go down into the city of Alexandria. And here's another image of the Aqueduct Bridge once the canal era was over. They then put, built a bridge right over it. But I mean, if you've been over there before, you know that Roslyn looks nothing like that today. So it's pretty remarkable. A number of roads. There's the Turnpike era in the early 1800s. These are toll roads built by private stock companies. They were covered with stone or gravel or planks, and you would turn the pike, you'd pay the fee, and it was a toll road, basically. The Little River Turnpike, the Leesburg Turnpike, Orange Plank Road, Georgetown Pike. All of these are private turnpikes. The first one was in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, but it would be the start of a huge private investment financing of toll roads, which continued through the 1850s. And then, of course, there were railroads after the 1840s. The Alexandria and Washington Railroad, the Orange and Alexandria Railroad, the Alexandria, Loudon, Hampshire Railroad. There were a number of small little railroads. There were no railroads linking yet DC with Richmond, or roads that continually linked there. As I mentioned, Fairfax County needed to move its courthouse out of Alexandria. It did so, and then you can go today to the intersection of Little River Turnpike and Knox Road to see the old historic Fairfax Courthouse. It was founded or would be incorporated as a town of Providence in 1850, and later in 1961 be incorporated as the city of Fairfax. As we go to the American Civil War between 1861 and 1865, you have troops from both sides, of course, crisscrossing Virginia. We all know that more battles were fought in Virginia than all the other states combined. We say that proudly. But a lot occurred in Northern Virginia. Two major battles, First and Second Manassas, took place on the Fairfax-Prince William line near the quiet stream called Bull Run in 1861 and 1862. This, I think, would later stave off a lot of development in northwestern Prince William for a number of years after the establishment of the park. And then there was also the Battle of Chantilly, or the Battle of Ox Hill, that was fought in a blinding thunderstorm in 1862. Unfortunately, there's only 5 acres left of that. It's been incorporated as a park operated by the Fairfax County Park Authority. It's over there right near Fair Oaks Mall. And there was a number of defenses established around the nation's capital, a number of strategic fortifications, making it one of the world's most fortified cities. By 1865, by the war's end, there are 68 forts, 93 batteries armed with about 800 cannon all around it. But Fort Ward, Fort Worth, Fort Ellsworth, the Arlington line of defenses with 34 forts, just a whole lot. And then after the war, there was the creation of the Arlington National Cemetery in 1864. The site was chosen was Robert E. Lee's wife's Arlington estate, which not only was aesthetically pleasing, but had beautiful views of the district, but it also had the valuable political effect of denying Lee and his family their home after the war's conclusion. Lee's wife later challenged the condemnation of the estate in 1883. It was returned to her, and then she sold it back to the government for a handsome profit. So I don't know where the justice is with that, but good for the Lees. And burials are very interesting, were segregated until 1948. But today it has grown to 639 acres with approximately 400,000 graves. If you have not been there, it's really a remarkable place. Other railroad towns, the town of Clifton, just over the Prince William line. You take Yates Ford Road over into Fairfax County, laid out in 1869, hasn't changed much. The population is about 170 people, but a beautiful, quaint little town. The town of Herndon, up top, is laid out incorporated in 1879. It's the coming of the what's known as the Washington Old Dominion Railroad in the 1850s that spurs its development. And the important thing about Herndon is milk. We'll get back to that in a little bit. But you can also see at East Falls Church, sort of Confunction Junction, just tons of horses and things like that waiting for the local rail line to show up. So that takes us to the end of the 1800s. Now we're going to go into the early 1900s. And now we're going to talk about growth occurring, because everything's been sort of organic to this point. Now we're going to talk about growth happening. The 20th century, if you all have studied American history, was a time of great growth in cities, as it was internationally. It was just a magnet for people to move from the rural area to the cities. And the same was true here in Northern Virginia, which had numerous small towns. Suburban growth in Northern Virginia was most pronounced, obviously, in Alexandria County, which is today Arlington County. The General Assembly in 1920 just decided to rename it, didn't consult any of the supervisors in Arlington County. They just said, we're changing it to Arlington to honor Robert E. Lee's home. So Arlington County becomes Alexandria County in 1920. At that point, this is what the layout of the farms and the property ownership kind of looked like. Alexandria County was still primarily rural, with large blocks of property, of farmland, and small little communities starting to take place. So names like Ballston, Clarendon, Meyer Heights, Roslyn Farm, they grew up along these sort of rural county roads. Clarendon becomes the commercial heart of downtown Arlington. Del Rey is just north of the city of Alexandria. There's a series of trolley lines that occur during this time as well. Arlington sort of grows. Here's Central Clarendon, Washington Boulevard coming in right here. If any of you all know where Liberty Tavern is, at the heart of Central Clarendon, it's right in this section of right there. But Clarendon really is the downtown district of Arlington County at this point in time, right in the central part of the county. As I mentioned, a number of trolleys. You could take the trolley all the way down to Mount Vernon if you liked. Pretty neat. There's also new roads that are constructed. The Jefferson-Davis Highway was a transcontinental railroad, or transcontinental road, that was supposed to run from Washington, D.C. over to San Diego. It's authorized by the General Assembly in 1922 to run between 14th Street Bridge and Clarksville, Virginia, down, and then it was supposed to carry on through North Carolina. The Lee Highway was a national auto trail road that the idea for which came out of a group of businessmen out of Roanoke. And the idea was to connect New York City with San Francisco. And so it was the southern answer to the first transcontinental highway known as the Lincoln Highway. And of course, here's the Jefferson Davis Highway. If you all have followed politics and recent things in different, recent years, you know that they have renamed both of these roads in Arlington County. And then Fairfax County has also renamed portions of Lee Jackson Memorial Highway and Lee Highway as well. And I will say this. The Jefferson Davis Highway was originally called, before it was christened the Jefferson Davis Highway, the Washington-Richmond Highway. And they started building it from Richmond, they started building it down from 14th Street, and the one place where they had trouble getting across was Chappawansett Creek, right at the bottom part of this county, so going into Stafford County. That was just a long bridge that they had to construct, which didn't open up until probably 1921 or so. But once that happened, that really was the first time that those two regions were connected. Going back to a couple of the roads and things like that, the Washington Old Dominion Railroad was very important for freight and passenger service. It was so slow because it had numerous stops. It was known as the Virginia Creeper. The Great Falls and Old Dominion Railroad went from Georgetown out to what is today Great Falls Park, where there was a place for people to come and cool off and things like that. But there were a couple stations, one of which was John McLean lending his name to one of the stations. And of course, that's the little hamlet of McLean would grow up around there. And eventually that roadbed would be taken up and turned into Old Dominion Drive. The importance of dairy farming cannot be understated in Northern Virginia during the late 1800s through the early 1950s. Especially during World War I, the demand for dairy products in the national capital area attracted farmers to dairy farming in Northern Virginia. So between 1920 and 1955, Fairfax County led all other jurisdictions in Virginia in terms of dairy farming. Herndon, Purcellville, these also developed into hubs of dairy farming as well. So we're not talking beef cattle, we're actually, we're talking about milk. Shown in the upper left-hand corner is Sadie. Everyone say hi to Sadie. She's a beautiful Holstein. She is pictured here after returning from her triumphant visit to the Virginia State Fair in 1924. She was said to be known as the best Holstein in the world because, get this, she had a record 30 tons of milk and 1 ton of butter in 3 years. So she is pretty remarkable. And then publicizing Fairfax County's leadership in dairy herds and milk production, these young ladies get to ride in the county's float at the Piedmont Dairy Farming Festival Parade in 1930. And you can see the milk jugs right there in Herndon, right there. And here is a sort of a Currier and Ives view of Herndon at the same time, late 1800s, early 1900s, and you just see the milk jugs all over the place. Here's the town of Providence, today's downtown Fairfax City. It's very bucolic in 1927, not that long ago, not even 90 years ago, or not even 100 years ago. Shockingly, and some things never change, Northern Virginia was infamous for the bad condition of its roads. They were narrow. Many of them were unpaved. The roads were often impassable. You just spit on the road and traffic slows down to, well, I'm talking not now, but I'm talking about 100 years ago. But you just got that. They were a quagmire of clay. So shown, if you guys have ever been to downtown Falls Church where the W&OD trail goes over Route 7, that's in the upper left-hand corner or upper right-hand corner. That's where that crossing is. You're looking at Broad Street, Route 7, looking due west.
Is that the hot air balloon in that picture down below?
Where?
Looks like it.
Where we got a hot air balloon? Down here?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's that. Yeah. It's that. Yeah. This is.
It's a hot air balloon.
That's right. Yeah, a lot of hot air. This is Route 123 between Tyson's Corner and the town of Vienna. So beautiful, and this is 1935. Okay, so on the eve of World War II. Okay, so that takes us up to the Warriors, speaking of which. Northern Virginia's history between 1930 and the present really can be summarized in one word, and that word, of course, is growth. During this time period, the region literally exploded as people and later businesses called Northern Virginia home. And what brought Northern Virginia into the modern era really was the dramatic growth of the federal government that came in the wake of the 1933 election of Franklin Roosevelt, or the inauguration of Franklin Roosevelt. He greatly increased federal programs and spending and bureaus to respond initially to the Great Depression. Concurrently with those increases came additional employees to administer the new programs, and many moved to Northern Virginia from all parts of the country to work for the federal government since it was right across the river. And since the automobile offered increased mobility, and since Northern Virginia offered a much less hectic lifestyle than the inner city, it became inevitable that they would call their Northern Virginia home permanently later on. And I would also say, too, that at this point, when you have all of the Yankees moving down into this area, and people from all across the country that are not addicted to the Dixiecrats and the Byrd political machine, this is really the first time that you start seeing a divergence between Fairfax County and Arlington going a different way from the rest of Virginia, and kind of people starting to look askance at Northern Virginia when you go downstate. Whether you like it or not, just that's what it was, socially and politically. There was significant federal wartime spending. The pace of growth picked up during the, coming out of the Great Depression, and then certainly during World War II. National Airport opens up in 1941. It's located on the Virginia side of the Potomac because it was closer to the White House, presumably an easier trip for Franklin Roosevelt, who was disabled from polio. There were a number of airfields in the vicinity here, but we needed a consolidated national airport, and that is what this was. You can see the columns and a little cupola in the original images of it that are emblematic or a nod, architectural nod to Mount Vernon. You also have Fort Belvoir, which starts out as Camp Humphreys during World War I. It's amazing when you think about who's on post today. It serves as the headquarters for several agencies, some 51,000 employees and 7,100 permanent residents, all living on post. The piece de resistance in all of the federal wartime spending has to be the Pentagon in 1943. You have defense contracting, which would eventually lead to the employment of advanced technologies that are clustered around the Pentagon, later out Route 7 to Tyson's, and later still on to Loudon. You have a number of roadways that come with the Pentagon roadway network, the ramps of Roslyn, the ramps of Crystal City. It all kind of looks the same. You never know which road you're on, but this whole system comes into play with the Pentagon. Arlington, which is crazy. This is a little aside. Arlington has a number of roads laid out on a grid. They need to know what to do with their, how to renumber things and everything like that. So they decided to come up with an alphabet naming system so that when you're over at the eastern part of the county, all of the names, the north-south names, are single. They go from A all the way to Z or whatever with single syllables. Then it starts up again with 2 syllables. Then it starts up again with 3 syllables. So when depending on where you are in the county, this is your single syllable, then your 2 syllable, then your 3 syllable. If you're on the north side of Route 50, you're north whatever street. On the south side, you're south whatever street. But presumably, you're supposed to be able to tell where you are in the county, but darned if I can tell. New roadways. There is the GW Parkway that is built in stages between 1929 and 1972. This is the first modern roadway built by the federal government. It popularized highway engineering techniques, landscape design techniques. This is really the first time that a major road is built anywhere in the country that has purposeful landscaping. Okay, scenic views, that sort of thing. The northern sections are completed in the 1950s. They are seen as masterful examples of parkway design. They have broader widths, they have more grassy medians, that sort of thing. The Route 50 corridor. It was long recognized by the Arlington County Board of Supervisors that a east-west connection needed to be provided. Columbia Pike wasn't cutting it, the Lee Highway wasn't cutting it, and Wilson Boulevard wasn't cutting it. And you had a lot of people that were commuting. And so they created what was known as Lee Boulevard, and it was connected, that in section in green, to Falls Church by 1938, and then eventually out to Fairfax Circle, shown in blue, by 1950. Shown up at the top is what it looked like the day it opened, and then of course, a couple decades later, you got all the commuters. It still looks like that, when you go there. What's interesting about it, though, and you can see this, is that in the Arlington County side, they made it very clear that they did not want to have commercial uses up against the road. So there's no commercial uses, direct access, and there's strip malls that have direct access to the road. As soon as you enter Fairfax County, it all changes. You have strip malls right up next to the road, and it definitely, when you're in the Arlington section of it, it does move. It moves a heck of a lot better than it does on the Fairfax section, believe it or not. And another road that had to be constructed as a wartime relief measure was the Shirley Highway, which was to connect the 14th Street all the way down to Woodbridge. And it would be constructed in stages, but it was to offer an alternative to the Washington-Richmond Highway, also known as the Jefferson-Davis Highway, Route 1. And here they are laying out the concrete. You can go onto YouTube. VDOT has actually a side-by-side comparison where it just drives through, Beauregard Street and King Street and Duke Street and all the way up. And you can see what it looked like then in 1955, and you can see what it looks like today. It's really cool to check out. Bottom right-hand corner is right at Shirlington. Lots of new developments come through. Fairlington, Park Fairfax, all wartime measures. I'm going to kind of skip through some of this stuff, but major townhouses and row houses built to house the federal government. A lot of you have probably seen this in Fairlington and stuff like that. You also you have Shirlington Village opening up in 1944 as the first large shopping center to open in the Washington, D.C. suburbs. It'd be later rehabilitated and rechristened the village at Shirlington in the 1980s. Take a look at this growth, this population growth map. Shown in blue is Arlington. It's clearly the winner because it had to absorb all the growth emanating out of D.C., going south and west. Fairfax is starting to tick up by the 1930s. Loudoun's population actually declines, and Prince William's is barely kind of creeping up at that point in time. Okay, so the war's over, everyone's happy, everyone's going, veterans are coming home, wartime energies are shifting to peacetime tasks. Federal employees and military service members are seeking affordable housing, first in close-in areas in Arlington and then in Fairfax and at greater and greater and greater distances. There is pressure to provide new roads and housing and services mounting. Everyone that can is coming along for the ride, right? We're all moving out of the city. And this trend mirrored a national trend in that mad dash to the suburbs. Many of you have probably seen movies like Edward Scissorhands, where everyone leaves to go to work at the same time, comes home at the same time. There's all these move-in days. This was repeated in hundreds of communities across the country. Some of you all might have pictures like this of when you or your parents built their first house. It was replicated all over, right? I mean, you go out and see the houses. These are my kids when we renovated our house, and I just had to show you how adorable they are. They're probably wondering where the heck I am right now, but we won't tell them. There is a lot of growth occurring, suburban development changing on the outskirts of Falls Church. If you know the State Theater, this is the State Theater, this is the 1950s. The heart of downtown Falls Church is right here. Our house is up in those grid street pattern homes up there, the ubiquitous Cape Cods that you see all over the place. This is Annandale in 1965, right? So brand spanking new suburbs, think roller skating rinks, think a lot of fun. McLean, we learned about how McLean is going, but you can see a lot of the farms and forest land being cleared for planned unit development. Springfield is one of the best responses, most well-known responses to Northern Virginia's growth. It was developed in 1946 by a realtor, Edward Carr, who thought that Springfield, 12 miles away from the capital, was the furthest that anyone would possibly travel to work in the District of Columbia. It has eventually grown. There's industrial parks, there's shopping malls. You all know Springfield pretty well. Other communities like Pimmott Hills outside of Tysons, Bellevue in the 1950s being constructed. Lake Barcroft, which originally was a reservoir for the city of Alexandria. It was sold to a group of New England developers in the 1950s who had the idea to develop a series of miniature country estates around the lake. And it's a pretty remarkable place. It's got miles of shoreline inside the Beltway, very bucolic and beautiful. Not everything was sort of Cape Cod, faux colonial at the time. You had a couple of communities like Holmes Run Acres and Holland Hills, which had some really neat architectural features. I won't dwell on that. Many of you all know Lake Jackson, which developed between the 1930s and 1950s. 800 acres created by damming the Occoquan River in 1927. Originally a summer retreat with a bunch of log cabins, and eventually would develop a reputation for being somewhat bohemian in a way. And then, of course, in 1955, the first of 1,000 homes that were built on the old Breeden Farm just north of where we sit tonight. Town status achieved in 1957. Eventually, it's incorporated as the youngest city in Virginia in 1975. And I do think they should use that as their economic development logo, Virginia's youngest city. Not everybody had the ability to join in the fun of the mad dash of the suburbs. There were racially restrictive covenants that were used between the 1920s and 1968 nationwide to prevent people of color from purchasing, leasing, occupying homes in white communities. In 1968, Congress would pass the Housing Rights Act, finally outlawing discrimination on the basis of race or ethnicity in the sale or rental of housing. And even though it's not a legally sanctioned practice, the residual patterns created by these racially restrictive covenants still persist. This one is from my own community, my own house. in Falls Church. A lot of stuff happens. The first shopping malls, some of you all might remember the Parkington Shopping Mall at the corner of Glebe and Wilson Boulevard in what is today Ballston. Parkington was the fact that it was a shopping mall, all air-conditioned, anchored by a Hex department store, surrounded by a parking garage. Arlington, parking garage, Parkington, there it is. And eventually it would be torn down in 1982 to become Ballston, Ballston Common, and later redeveloped again as Ballston Quarter. A little bit further out, there were 7 Corners in 1956. It was Northern Virginia's first regional shopping mall. Came with a bunch of beautiful roads, which are now clogged. And further out in Northern Virginia, you have large-scale farming taking over. The mechanization of farming, farming really is only successful and profitable when it's done on a large scale. This is the Sunset Hills Farm. It's about 4,800 acres at that point in time, which would later become Reston. A lot of small little crossroads communities, not unlike what you might see in Nokesville or Ayden, Colvin Run. This is Tyson's Corner in 1937. So then we go into the 1960s, and growth in 1960s was almost exclusively in Fairfax County. Now you had Marumsco Hills and things like that, you had Broad Run Farms and Loudon, but the vast majority of the growth was in Fairfax because it was the next jurisdiction out for a large scale, a lot of stuff. There was a lot of growth in the federal government at that point in time and spending, and all of that point, it was all about decentralization. We're moving the CIA, creating the new CIA headquarters out in Langley. It says Lorton, that's incorrect, it's Langley. We have a series of Nike missile sites in Lorton, Burke, and in Great Falls that are going to save us from the evil commies. We have the USGS headquarters in Reston moving out. But the piece de resistance for the region, just like the Pentagon was 20 years earlier, has to be Dulles Airport, which opens in 1962. It is opened on 17,000 acres of land on the Loudon-Fairfax line in Chantilly. The site was chosen after years of opposition from residents in what is today the Burke area. You know, it's kind of like this, and they would have had to do a lot of site engineering to have some runways out there. They fought it, and what ended up happening was half of the land was divested by the FAA, sold to developers. The other half was given to the Commonwealth of Virginia to become Burke State Management Area, later sold to Fairfax County Park Authority, became Burke Lake Park. Here, though, is Dulles Airport. Its terminal is designed by Eero Saarinen. It's definitely designed for the jet age. I like this because it shows the vast land. It's just huge amount of land, and it's set in a glacial lake bed, extremely flat, perfect for international airport. It was originally considered to be a white elephant until the late 1980s, after United made Dulles one of its 4 domestic hubs in 1988. Today it accounts for about 25,000 jobs. With it, like the Pentagon, comes some upgrades. One is that what we know is Route 28, shown in red, is connected all the way up to Route 7. Many of you all might remember that the majority of that was a 2-lane road. There was also the Dulles Access Road, which was 4 lanes, no tolls. It was not meant to be a commuter road that connected what became the Capitol Beltway with the airport. And then we'll talk about the section between the connector section in yellow in a little bit. And then there's also something called the Dulles Interceptor, which was, there was no sewage out there. And so they had to construct a sewer line, and the sewer line goes all the way up where, sort of kind of where Route 28 is, up to the Potomac. Then it goes all the way down to the Blue Plains treatment plant in the District of Columbia. If you flush your toilet at Dulles Airport, it takes 6 days for it to find its way down to the district where it's treated. But thanks to the growth, thanks to these roads, and thanks to that Dulles Interceptor, you get Sterling Park, you get a lot of Reston and Herndon that would not have been able to be constructed but for the Dulles Interceptor. Fairfax County needed a new office building. The old courthouse and the county administrative buildings were getting too small. The Massey building opens up in 1969. You can't go take a picture of it anymore because it has been torn down. Further out in the suburbs during this time is Leesburg in the early 1960s. If you all have been there, you know the outlet malls. They are right here. So that's the bypass around what is downtown Leesburg. We talked about Reston just a second ago, just very, very briefly. Let me see, 1964, a new center of growth. A guy named Bob Simon inherits Carnegie Hall from his father, decides to take all the proceeds, negotiates with a guy named A. Smith Bowman, who owned that Sunset Hills farm that we just saw a picture of, and he decides to have a novel idea where, at a time where we're segregating all these uses, right? Townhomes are over here, apartments are over here, office park, industrial park. I'm going to take them and I'm going to blend them all together. And I'm going to create something totally novel. I'm not going to have racial deed restrictive covenants. And he created what became known as the town of Reston. He took his initials, Robert E. Simon, added the English suffix of town, and created and named it after himself. At the heart of this, there were going to be a series of different village centers, and at the heart of it was going to be a town center, which he envisioned would rise like Manhattan with farmland surrounding it. And if you all remember the opening of Reston Town Center in 1989, that's exactly what it looked like. This is one of the village centers here, the Lake Ann Village Center, which was the most successful of all of them. It's a series of village centers that were planned, but the majority of them just turned out to be glorified strip malls. This one, though, with its brutalist architecture, just imagine driving out in the middle of nowhere in Fairfax County in 1966 and seeing something like this. It's pretty remarkable what he did. Listed on the National Register. And this is what it looks like from the air. And then this sort of shows the Dulles Toll Road going out. Dulles Airport's at the north. But you can see this area between this road here, Sunset Hills Road to the north, Sunrise Valley Drive to the south. On this side is going to be all the residential. And in here is going to be the industrial areas. And you can see the tremendous amount of growth, land for growth that Reston offered at the time. Series of communities, Kings Park just off of the Beltway. Again, out of Braddock Road, probably 2 miles away from the Beltway. People thought that was as far out as people were going to go. This is Tyson's Corner in 1937. This is it in 1967 after VDOT, the Virginia Department of Highways, grade separated the interchange of Route 7 and Route 123. And then in 1968, you can see it here, Tyson's Corner Center, or Tyson's 1, opens up, which was a project of Ted Lerner, drew national attention in Northern Virginia, became one of the first super regional malls in the country. A project like Westgate, 3 million square feet, opens up in 1962. And you just think about this, 3 million square feet. There are 3,600, regions, whatever you want to call it, MSAs in metropolitan statistical areas in the country. All but like 3 of them would kill to have 3 million square feet. I mean, we take this stuff for granted, how much development we have here. But there's Tyson's 1. This is what it looked like in the 1980s. That's what it looked like in the 1970s in the upper right-hand corner. And of course, it was expanded in 2001. And then most recently, they have plans to go vertical in all the parking lots. And this is what it looks like. Arlington County was not to be left out during this time. Even though its population kind of stagnated, Arlington County decided to grow and redevelop its areas. First, it was Roslyn. And in 1961, Roslyn was just, pawn shops. It was places where you get your car replaced. It was some lumber yards. It really wasn't anything. But, all that changed in 1959 when Marriott opened the Key Bridge Marriott right there. Many of you all know it. It's actually abandoned now. But at that point in time, there were riots that were going on in downtown D.C. Roslyn, just proximal to downtown D.C., was seen as a safe place for the government and for private corporations. So it just boomed. So, just take a look at 1961. And then 7 years later. And you can see the difference. Up top is 1962, and 5 years later, look at all those high rises. Totally crazy. And of course, today it's known as kind of the Manhattan of the DC area. Very impressive. At the southern end of the county, and this is what it looks like from the air. Really quite, incredible. And then at the southern end of the county by National Airport is Crystal City, which also grows during this time. There's many apocryphal stories about how Crystal City, got its name. Some say there was a crystal chandelier in one of the buildings, Crystal House 1, and then it was just replicated. Crystal House 2, Crystal Square, Crystal Plaza, Crystal Towers, etc. This is interesting. Again, we didn't have any hospitals, right? There were really no hospitals. Ground was broken in 1968 or 1939 or 1968 for, 1961. It was Fairfax Hospital was opened, and there's a story about how the ribbon cutting was supposed to be at 12 p.m. and at 11:45, a husband and his wife pull up. She's pregnant, and they give birth even before the opening of the hospital. And by the 1980s, there were more live births occurring at Fairfax Hospital than any other hospital in the country. Just remarkable. And I was born, I'm sure, in like that room right there. parks. This is one of the most important things that makes a region. The Northern Virginia Regional Park Authority was an interjurisdictional agency which today operates about 10,000 acres of parks. There's 30 different parks that they have. The best known, of course, is the Washington Old Dominion Trail, which was converted, took the old railroad bed of the W&OD Railroad, which shut down in 1968 and converted into the first rails to trails path in the country. Very, very successful. Fairfax County Park Authority. I want to spend just a second talking about this. The Park Authority is established by the Fairfax County Board in 1950 with the goal to reserve 15 acres of open space for every 1,000 residents. And today, the Park Authority is the county's largest landowner. They oversee 24,000 acres of land. That is 44% larger than all of Arlington County combined. There are 17 million visitors a year that go to their parks, and it's just really a huge success. And some of these parks that you all know of, I'm sure, of course, Huntley Meadows, Sully Woodlands, Burke Lake, etc. Other things that make a region are performing arts venues. Wolf Trap, the first national park for the performing arts, opens in 1966. First performance, there were encroaching roads and growth of Tyson's Corner that led Catherine Filene Schaus to want to preserve it. She offered it up to Congress. They could have the farm if they would just use it for performing arts. And at the time, Congress said, we don't want to take it on. You got Meriwether Post Pavilion opening up across the river. You just opened the Kennedy Center. Is there really a need for more performing arts venues? And time, of course, has proven that there was a need. And so it's pretty remarkable. School systems open up. Fairfax County Public Schools, has to grow and grow and grow and grow. There was a period where they were opening 20 schools a year. By the 1980s, it's operating the largest public bus fleet east of the Mississippi River, and pretty remarkable. There's Northern Virginia Community College. In the 1950s, if you wanted to seek post-secondary education in Northern Virginia, you had to look downtown. But American University, Georgetown, GW, they did not have the room to expand. They did not expand during the war. And so Virginia creates the community college, passes the community college statute. Northern Virginia Community College gets chartered in the early 1967 when the Annandale campus opens up for Northern Virginia College. And today, of course, it's expanded to 6 campuses, including 2 in this county. The University of Virginia wants to realize Thomas Jefferson's vision of having education within a day's drive of every Virginian. And so they open up a small college in a 2-story building at Bailey's Crossroads in 1950. In the mid-1960s, the city of Fairfax owns land just outside its borders. They give it to the rector and visitors of the University of Virginia to create George Mason College of UVA. And then it achieves independent status in 1972 as George Mason University. It is now the largest public research university in the Commonwealth with other campuses, including here in Prince William County. If any of you guys have been to the Patriot Center, that's where I saw my first concert. It was awesome. Now I take my kids there to see Paw Patrol live, which is not as awesome, but it's still fun. And here's images of different aspects of GMU, which they keep expanding here right off of 234 bypass, which is remarkable. New highways, Interstate Highway Act, 1956, and you get the Capitol Beltway opening in 1964. This spurs development in Northern Virginia. Originally, it was envisioned as a bypass around the district, and we all know what happened. There was explosive growth of housing and businesses and shopping centers and everything like that. And all of a sudden, you have it widened and everything. So that's the opening of Capitol Beltway. I-95 is completed south of Woodbridge all the way to Richmond in the 1960s as well as a 2-lane configuration. You all know where the rest stop is and where the water tower is that says welcome to Prince William County, as we also are stuck in traffic, unfortunately, just sitting there. But that's completed all the way down to Richmond. And everyone's favorite parking lot, I-66, that opens up in 1964. The first section to Centerville's in 1964. Then it's completed, from I-81 to Centerville in 1964. Then it's completed, and that's a 2-lane in each direction configuration. Then it's completed all the way to the Beltway a couple years later. Oh, and here it is. Yeah, this is it. This is the sections that were completed. So between Centerville and Gainesville in 1964, Centerville and the Beltway in 1966, and then it takes a couple decades later. I-95 over the Occoquan, many of you all might remember this before the HOV lanes were extended. It actually looks like I-81, like around Roanoke, like if you kind of blur your eyes a little bit. And of course, we all know that it looks like that today. Interesting, bus lanes, the Shirley busway, there was a need to get people to and from, so what they did was they took the median out of the Shirley Highway, they made it a bus exclusive lane. It proved so successful that they decided to open it up to high occupancy vehicles. So the first HOV lanes in the country were here in Northern Virginia. And as you go up I-395 today, it's hard to remember, or hard to believe, but the W&OD Railroad before it closed was an at-grade crossing. So can you imagine like traveling along 45, 50 miles an hour, I'm gonna be home soon, I'm smoking a cigarette, can't wait to see my kids, and then all of a sudden you gotta slam on your brakes to allow the world's slowest train to cross your path. A series of different roads were constructed too. This is from the 1969 sort of circumferential highway plan. Only one of these, there are different sections that were constructed. This blue line, which is supposed to be the Outer Beltway, portions of it would later become the Fairfax County Parkway. The red line was supposed to go from Shirlington out to Manassas, link up, and go all the way to 29 heading to Charlottesville. That was called the Monticello Freeway. The only portion of the Monticello Freeway that was constructed, when you get off of the Beltway and you go west on Braddock Road, and it's like 10 lanes wide, and it's like 2 miles that you just speed through, that's the one section that was constructed of that road. Fairfax County has zoning map. Growing pains. This was replicated in the late 1990s in Prince William County. It was replicated again in the early 2000s in Loudoun County, right? It's this constant tug of war. And with Fairfax County, because Prince William really wasn't feeling this at this point in time, but you had rural landowners in the western part of the county who wanted to protect their potential profits. They controlled the board of supervisors. And you had suburbanites that were moving in the Falls Church and Annandale and McLean areas around Alexandria as well, that were arguing for more schools, less traffic, more libraries, more police, and stuff like that. So it became this huge tug of war that would be repeated again and again. Not going to spend too much time talking about different streets, although they are fascinating, but you can basically look at an old street map and just see when things were built, which is kind of cool. 1970s, we're moving right along into the 70s. Growth continued to be attributable to federal government employment. You have the rebuilding of the Pentagon Road Network into what was then the largest interchange complex in the world. It was known as the Mixing Bowl before the Springfield Interchange was known as the Mixing Bowl. You have Metro Rail coming to Virginia as well. This is the first rapid transit system in only rapid transit system in the DC area. It was an interstate compact between DC, Maryland, and Virginia. The first station opens in Virginia in 1977 on the Orange Line, which was then extended to Clarendon and Ballston by 1979. But you go into those stations and they have vaulted sort of cathedral-like ceilings. You got granite, you've got brass railings. It was meant to be an elegant way to encourage suburbanites to come into the city for commuting and things like that. Arlington County, because their whole county was built out at that point in time. And the areas around Clarendon, Roslyn, and Ballston were really kind of not looking that great. The county basically fought with the Virginia Department of Highways to route Metro through its established commercial corridors. So you can see the clearing for what would become I-66 to the north. That's where the Department of Highways wanted to put it, right in the median of it. Arlington successfully got everyone to agree to push it through Roslyn, Courthouse, Clarendon, Virginia Square, and then ultimately Ballston as a way to rejuvenate and revitalize what was a decaying area. And if you've been to Arlington, you don't have to like it, but it's clear what the results are. It's an economic success story by any measure. And around each of those metro rail stations, they wanted to have tall buildings and sort of mini skylines tapering down, and then other tall buildings and mini skylines tapering down, and that sort of thing, what they called the bullseye concept. They did the cut and cover method, where they basically dig it up, fill it up, cover it back over. This is Virginia Square. And here's the opening of the Courthouse Metro Rail Station. West of Ballston, VDOT got its way, and it runs in the median out to Vienna. And of course, if you go out to Arlington today, you can sort of see what's occurred. Right around the metro stations are the high-rises. Then you step away on one side of Wilson Boulevard, and you go down to established residential communities, kind of right across the street. And you go to Arlington, you immediately know you're in a different kind of environment. There's an emphasis on pedestrian connectivity. You got bicyclists everywhere. Everyone's driving a Prius. It's wonderful. And the whole concept of this called transit-oriented development, this is a nationally recognized success story from Roslyn in the foreground all the way out to Ballston along the Orange Line. And again, you can see what's happened with Roslyn over the years. This is the old Bailey's Airport. I'm not going to spend too much time on that. You've got Skyline, if any of you all remember Skyline, which opened up in the early 1970s. There's 6 office buildings, a hotel and conference center. In 1972, there is the, 1973, Skyline Tower 1 collapses. But this led Fairfax County to really start investing in its building inspection services division because they were anticipating a lot more high-rises that were coming throughout the county. And you can sort of see it standing on the steps of the Capitol looking west. These Spartan-like structures are rising out of the mist. Springfield Mall opens up in 1973 as an enclosed shopping mall. It closes in 2012 to be revamped as Springfield Town Center because that's what you do when things decay. You revamp it as a town center. But many people from points south, including in Woodbridge, and I grew up in Lorton. We all came up to Springfield, right? I mean, that's where we all hung out. Prince William County. Dale City starts in the 1960s. Cecil D. Hilton begins building on land west of I-95, south of Woodbridge. In 1965, I'm a zoning attorney. In one massive rezoning, the Board of County Supervisors grants Hilton the first residential planned community in what would become Dale City. It's a massive area that's bound, of course, by Hoadley Road, what today is Prince William Parkway, Minnieville Road, Cardinal Drive, and more. And the sheer size of Dale City is just way bigger than anything that you would see in Fairfax County because the land holdings were so much bigger. By the time growth got out here, they were bigger farms, the developers knew what they were doing, and they were able to amass these massive pieces of land. Montclair, opens in 1979, 1,600 acres, 4,000 homes. Alexandria, not to be undone. It was always kind of hit or miss, but there were major revitalization efforts that occur in the early 1980s when they did a sale leaseback of the Torpedo Center to turn that into an arts center. They redid the waterfront. And then at the other end, they had the Blue Line coming down with Metro Rail. And so you have this sort of twin anchors that fuse the revitalization of downtown Alexandria. Here's what King Street and Union Street looked like in 1976 and the torpedo factory there as soon as it opened up. And then you can see what happened to the King Street Metro and everything that sort of happened in between, sort of that twin anchor redevelopment strategy. The city of Alexandria also annexed land west of Quaker Lane, including portions of what is today what's known as Shirley Highway. And when they annexed it in 1952, it doubled the size of the city. I was living in right here, and I was bused across the city every night or every day to go to elementary school in downtown Alexandria because they paired a majority white school in the west end of the county with a majority African American school in the east, in the downtown area, even in the 1980s. My mom grew up in Alexandria. She's part of that Remember the Titans graduating class. And the same thing happened with her son with busing and integration in the 1980s. And there I am as a dork with the patrol badge in the second row. And this is what it looked like when they annexed it. And what's funny is they annexed it from Fairfax County. Fairfax County, of course, fought it tooth and nail. And, those signs that say, welcome to the city, enter city of Alexandria, leave Fairfax County. You see them with, enter Manassas City, leave Prince William County. Fairfax County appealed the decision, the Commission on Local Government Law decision, to the Circuit Court and ultimately the Supreme Court. And during that time, the city of Alexandria moved the Welcome to Alexandria signs out to here, right? And Fairfax County Board got the sheriff's office to cut them down and put them back here while it was on appeal. And ultimately, Fairfax County won the battle. What's interesting about it is they too, like Arlington, needed to come up with a street naming regime. And the naming regime they came up with in 1952 on the eve of the Civil Rights Movement was to name all of the north-south streets after Confederate generals. Pickett, Beauregard, Van Dorn, all of them. And I've highlighted them all here. Thought it was pretty interesting, right? West End kind of booms in the 1960s and 1970s. You can see Landmark Mall right there. This is kind of what it looked like in the 1980s. Southern Towers at Seminary Road. These are massive developments, right? I mean, 1,200 homes. And here's Landmark Mall, which was originally an outdoor mall. Many of you all might remember this from the 1980s. Opens in 1965 with a Sears, a Woody's, and a Hecht's being the primary anchors. Later, it would be enclosed into one of the most unsuccessful malls ever created. Now it's been totally torn down, and it's going to be created. It's being turned into a town center. The Hamlets. Some of you all might remember the Radisson Mark Plaza Hotel, which opened up in 1985, the tallest building in the region at the time. And then we go into the 1980s. 1980s, you have major companies moving into Northern Virginia. The very first Fortune 500 company was ExxonMobil, or Mobil, which fully moved its headquarters out of Manhattan, right off the Beltway in Route 50 in 1987. This would be followed by Freddie Mac, which consolidates its headquarters in 1990. Take a look at the pink granite Brazilian granite, which was very popular at the time. It's replicated all over the place. If there's any building that said the go-go 1980s in Northern Virginia, it has to be the shopping bag building, also known as Tycon Tower 1 in Tyson's Corner. There were supposed to be 2 other sister buildings for a total of 3, but the recession got to it. And that's what it looked like in 1989 if you went out to Tyson's Corner. It was a very exciting time to be in Northern Virginia. The NADA building, National Automobile Dealers Association building, I remember this distinctly, driving past there in my mom's Mazda, just seeing these amber waves of grain, which is really just weeds, amber waves of grain with a building rising out of it, and I can't believe I found that picture. And then in 1988, Tyson's Galleria opens, Tyson's 2. It's an upscale mall to complement Tyson's Corner 1, the low-class mall. And it is anchored by a Ritz-Carlton and 2 office buildings. It doesn't get any more bourgeois-y than that. And that's what it looks like when you go there today. But this cements Northern Virginia as kind of the the Rodeo Drive of the DC area, the best shopping in the DC area. Right across the street is Fairfax Square, which would open up in 1990, mixed-use complex, again, in Brazilian granite. It's got the world's largest Tiffany's outside of New York. It's got Hermès, it's got Elizabeth Arden, it's got an Equinox gym, and that sort of thing. The question of the 1980s, as growth moves west on I-66, which is shown on the left-hand side of the screen, hard to believe it used to look like that, is what to do with Western Fairfax. This is Fair Oaks Mall. It used to be on an old golf course. But the Fairfax County studies what to do with it. They come up with the Fairfax Center plan. They don't want to see any gas stations. They don't want to see any pylon signs or anything like that. If you go out to Fairfax Center, Fair Lakes today, it's pretty much developed exactly as it was planned. And some of you all might remember driving on the first part of the Fairfax County Parkway or Fair Lakes Parkway, where you actually have, curvilinear streets and trees in the middle of it. And coming from Alexandria in the late 1990s, driving around after church with my grandmother, I had never seen anything like it before. It was fresh, it was new, it was beautiful at the time. And this is kind of what Fair Lakes and Fairfax Center pretty much looks like. The public response, if there was one building that said it's the go-go 80s, when it was approved in 1989, it was just an incredible building. When it opened in 1993, the Fairfax County Government Center was seen as way too extravagant. But this is the Fairfax County Government Center, and it was, built in an area forest, kind of like Brasilia, rising out of the rainforest. But the Fairfax County Government Center opens up, and it's a postmodernist building, really quite dramatic and impressive when you go in there. Brazilian granite everywhere, of course, but very fancy little, even the room numbers are in bold italics Times New Roman. It just gives you a sense of like, oh, wow, I've got to better look nice and behave. But it's a pretty remarkable building. What's interesting is that at the exact same time that Fairfax County was building a 12-acre parking lot and a very suburban configuration, Loudoun County opens up its government center in downtown Leesburg and chooses to stay in the heart of its historic, the historic county seat, right in downtown Leesburg. They go vertical. The most suburban county of all, Loudoun, goes vertical. Prince William County moves all of its, much of its administrative stuff out of downtown Manassas over to Woodbridge into the McCourt building in 1985, just to be closer to eastern Prince William, where they thought its population was. These are the old ADC maps that you all might remember. This is what it looked like in 1982. This is what it looked like in 1988. This is what it looked like in 1995. This is what it kind of looks like in early 2000s. A lot of growth south of the Beltway in the Springfield area, Manchester Lakes, Burke Center, Kingstown, all of that stuff. If you've been to Kingstown, we'd like for you to think about a town that doesn't even exist. Space yet. Kingstown, opening fall of 1986. Kingstown Town Center, kind of a glorified strip mall, but at least they're trying. This is what the Beulah Street corridor looked like. If you all know where the GSA building is, it's right there. If you know where Springfield Mall is, it's at the top of the screen. The car dealerships along 95 are right here, and here's 95. This is what it looked like in 1980. Here's what it looks like in 1997. So a whole lot of growth that you can see. You also have what's known as Fairview Park, which opens up in 1986. It's planned as a high-quality mixed-use development to meet Fairfax County's objective of economic development and compatible infill. It's hotly contested by surrounding neighbors, but that comes with a major interchange redo for Route 50. Here's what Reston Town Center looked like in 1990. Recall what Bob Simon wanted to do, but he wanted to have a highly urban landscape in the heart of a rural setting. This is what it looked like when it opened up. It was barely a block long, and here's what it looked like when it opened in 1989, and here's what it looks like today. Totally built out, and a big success story in a lot of ways. The Oak Hill area was next to grow. This is the area that's west of, right along the Fairfax County Parkway south of Herndon. Here's what it looks like in 1982. Here's what it looks like in 1997. So Franklin Farm, Fox Mill Estates, Franklin Farm 2, all of this stuff. And Franklin Farm is built on 800 acres, 880-acre dairy farm. They saved the silo, converted it into a house. Actually, it's kind of cool. Centerville and Chantilly are perhaps the biggest growth story at the time. Fairfax County downzoned in the Occoquan downzoning in 1982, which basically said 5-acre lots around what is today the town of Clifton. In exchange, we're going to upzone Centerville. That's where we're going to put the growth. The growth did not occur in Centerville until late 80s, okay? But the planning for it started way earlier. So I-66 is cutting across the screen here, okay? 2 lanes in each direction, 4-lane median divided interstate. So here's what it looks like in 1980. Here's what it looks like 10 years later. 10 years. Okay, 10 years. Here's Chantilly, the bottom of the airport's right here. This is the 2-lane Route 28. Here's what it looks like in 1980. Here's what it looks like 10 years later. Just crazy growth, right? Speaking of Route 28, many of you remember that it was 2 lanes. It was just backed up, wall-to-wall traffic. Richmond said, we're not going to give you any money to widen it. And so the commercial and industrial property owners persuaded Loudoun and Fairfax County to institute what's known as the Route 28 tax district. It's basically, revenues that go to widen Route 28 and convert all the at-grade intersections into interchanges. And if you remember what it was like from 2 lanes, even if you remember what it was like when it was 6 lanes, now that it's 6 to 8 lanes, the traffic does flow a heck of a lot better through there. It just does. You got to be real careful though, because they will pull you over. So that's what it looks like today. And as you go up towards the airport, you see these sort of high rises that are, it's like another little city. And that could be, any region would love to have that type of growth, right? Up near the airport, there is Dulles Corner, very similar to Fairview Park. There's an emphasis on public art. Westfields opens up in the late 1980s. The centerpiece of that is the Westfields International Hotel, which when that opened up, it's like no one's seen anything like that here in this region before. Really remarkable. Not going to spend too much time on this, except to say that this was the Occoquan. This is the Occoquan tributaries and the watershed. Fairfax County decided to downzone its portion of it through a hotly contested battle, which they won after the developers beat up on Fairfax year after year. Fairfax County, believe it or not, they wanted to make all of this portion of it 2-acre zoning. And can you imagine what that would have been like had they won those court cases, what Fairfax would be like today? But when you go to the Clifton area, it looks bucolic because it's lower density, but it's really just 5-acre lots, which frankly is happening to a lot of the rural Crescent right now, being carved up into 10-acre lots by right. So it's very beautiful. It does stop growth in a lot of ways. But it's really just large lot subdivisions. But it has kept a couple of farms still there. But that's pretty much what it looks like when you go through there. The farm I worked on was in an area of this county, an area of that county as well. Potomac Mills, as we go through the 1980s, opens up in 1985. By 1993, it's said to be Virginia's largest tourist location with some 8 million tourists a year. When phase 2 is completed, it stretches for 9/10 of a mile end to end. Pretty remarkable. Okay, some of you all might know about the Williams Center controversy, but Peterson, or Hazel Peterson, gets about 514 acres adjacent to Manassas National Battlefield Park. They receive approval from the Board of County Supervisors in 1987 for 975 homes and a 1.2 million square foot mall. Opponents, including from what became known as the Save the Battlefield Coalition, protested. This is also when you start seeing the rise of an organization called the Piedmont Environmental Council. But really, it's the Save the Battlefield Coalition which persuades Congress to condemn the property and incorporate it into Manassas National Battlefield Park. Some of you all might remember a woman named Annie Snyder, who was really the leader of that, shown on the left hand. But this galvanized a hell of a lot of people to try to save the battlefield. And it just, I mean, the stories behind it and how they did it are pretty legion. A lot of growth in Loudoun, Sugarland Run, Ashburn Village, all of eastern Loudoun pretty much looks just like this. You know, it's eastern Loudoun. It's exactly like this. This is it. Ashburn Village, all these are laid out in the early 1980s. The approvals for it came in the late 70s and early 80s. Lansdowne, Xerox decides to buy 1,200 acres as a corporate retreat. They want to build 1,200 homes as well, and then build a golf course. And they build their conference center out at Lansdowne in 1989. This is what Ashburn looked like in 1985, if you can believe it. That's Ashburn, right? You know, pretty crazy. Falls Church, this is what West Broad Street looked like. They're not to be forgotten either. Notice all the overhead power lines and everything like that. They partner with VDOT to basically convert everything, put everything underground, have brick sidewalks, Acorn Street lamps that opened up in 1993. You get the WNOD Trail Bridge that goes over Route 7. There's the ribbon cutting. The State Theater is revamped in 1997 as a performing arts venue from an old movie theater, and Falls Church sort of comes alive. Clarendon keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. You get the Fashion Center at Pentagon City, which, like Tyson's 2, is anchored by office buildings and a Ritz-Carlton. And finally, all the DC folks have a place that's immediately adjacent to them to go shopping for all their high-end stuff. And Crystal City starts booming and revitalizing as well. Orange Line goes all the way out to Vienna. Here's what it looked like when it opened up in 1986. Fairfax County did not want to do high-density development, unlike Arlington. They wanted to use Metro Rail as commuter hubs. And so there's a lot of parking lots around Metro Rail and Fairfax County stations, but they are gradually going, Fairfax County's seen the error of its ways, and now they're all going vertical. I mentioned that it took a very long time for I-66 to get from the Beltway to, or the toll road to get from the Beltway to, from I-66 to go from the Beltway into the District of Columbia. This was eventually completed in 1981 after a very hard-fought battle. Nothing galvanized people against this from a racial, social equity perspective than trying to stop I-66. Just protest galore. What eventually happened was they had an agreement. The agreement was, we're going to allow the interstate, but it's got to be 2 lanes in each direction, got to have Metro in the median, got to have a trail called the Martha Custis Trail that will go from East Falls Church all the way into Georgetown, that will connect to the WNOD Trail. Got to have heavy landscaping, rusticated or the brownish colored street lamps, and not as many signs. And so that's been bastardized over the past 10 years or so. But before that, it was a pretty nice looking highway for an interstate for you to drive down. One of the casualties of I-66 was that there was a Frank Lloyd Wright designed house sitting right in the middle of it. The Leahy family donated to the National Trust for Historic Preservation, who took it apart bit by bit, numbered each one of the panels, and reconstructed the Usonian house twice on land that it owned at Woodlawn Plantation, where you can go see it today. And if you haven't been there, it's a remarkable place. Fairfax County Parkway is another 35-mile planned highway, highly controversial. It's completed in segments, finally is completed in 2001. The federal government, Northern Virginians, they were tired of people driving on the access road this way to the airport, looping back and coming in every evening to the community. So Virginia, once again, Richmond said, we're not going to widen the road, we're not going to build a road, or anything like that, but you can build a toll road if you like. And so the Dulles Toll Road flanks the airport access road. This is the Wheelie Avenue interchange in 1986. There's now a Metro Rail station there. Out in western Loudoun, you got the Route 7 bypasses around the towns out there, and you can sort of see what, the era that occurred in, more in the highway building mode. And 1980, the third lane of I-95 is completed between Ashland and Triangle. Can you imagine I-95 being 4 lanes today? I cannot. We all know about TJ. We should know about the Center for Innovative Technology. These are things that occurred because of the growth that occurred here and the decisions that were made. So take a look at this, the population, and I'm going to speed through the rest of this because we're short on time. I've probably already gone over. But take a look at Fairfax County. You wonder why all the other counties dislike Fairfax. Well, this is it. It's accommodated the growth. It's just how it is. So going into the new era, we're kind of filling in the pieces. You got the old Cameron Farms Army base, Army Depot in Alexandria that turns into Cameron Station, shown in the upper left-hand corner. You've got Carlisle, which you can see as you enter Virginia from Maryland all across the Woodrow Wilson Bridge. You got Ford's Landing, the finishing out of the Alexandria waterfront. And then you go to Prince William County, which is pretty darn remarkable and for what it is. So in Prince William County, at least, the issue really was the lack of cross-county links, right? You had Davis Ford Road and you had Route 234. That was pretty much it. And any time that there was an accident or the schools were letting out and the school buses would stop, both two-lane roads would come to a stop. And the Board of County Supervisors said this is just absolutely ridiculous. We are going to construct a couple of different things. First, we're going to widen 234. We're going to get VDOT to do that. We're going to do a bypass around Manassas, link it up to I-66. And then maybe someday, and you can see this at that interchange at 234 and I-66, it's meant to go over 66 at some point. VDOT built it that way purposely so it could go all the way up to Route 7. It'll never happen. And then Prince William County decided, we're not going to wait for Richmond. We're going to build the Prince William Parkway. The county approved $51 million in bond financing for the Parkway in 1988 and have a special tax on Potomac Mills, and the county was able to construct that link in 3 years. 3 years, okay? Pretty remarkable. They named it after former board chair Kathleen Seefeld, who many of you all I'm sure know, but it's a remarkable story. And for those of you who have ever seen Deep Impact, right before the 234 bypass opened to traffic, Hollywood came to town and they flooded it to have the end of the world. You can see Robert Duvall and Morgan Freeman in a gripping movie, but you know that they came here to 234 bypass. Western Prince William also boomed at this point in time. Gainesville, the battlefield really served as a way to stem the tide of growth. It wasn't too long ago that you go to Gainesville, you go over at the intersection of 55 and 29, you go over the railroad, and it's just nothing but gas stations, like a couple of gas stations, and then there's nothing, right? So that battlefield and the growth in Centerville really staved off growth here in Western Prince William for a very long time. You have Innovation Park opening up in 1988. I don't care, for those of you who are from Prince William, good for you. For the rest of us, none of us had heard of Bristow, ever, until 1995 when the Nissan Pavilion opened up, okay? And it's a tremendous success story, but that was the first time that we'd ever heard of Ballsford Road or Wellington Road or Wellingford Road or any of that stuff. It's pretty remarkable. Okay. Disney comes to town. You all might remember that. Disney Company buys or options about 2,000 acres of land on the north side of I-66, just north of Haymarket and Route 15 for a Disney America theme park. You get tremendous local resistance that leads to the end of the idea as it being a viable idea. The arguments were Disney, destroys real Piedmont, Virginia history at the expense of having a Hollywoodified, whitewashed version of history. But this is what it was going to look like for those of you guys who might have been around. There's a little mini Ellis Island and little old, Oregon Trail town and all that other stuff, okay? But the question, though, is, all of that ended up becoming Piedmont, Dominion Valley, Heritage Hunt. And the question is, what's better? Was it better to do economic development and the hotels and gas stations that would come with it, or is it better to have those communities? Something happened. Which one was better? And that's been a hot debate for a number of years. The first toll road to be opened up since the colonial era opened in 1995. That's the Dulles Greenway that goes from the airport all the way out. It's don't ever drive on the thing. It's just not worth it. And I'll tell you why. When you're at the airport, okay, thanks to the Route 28 tax district and thanks to what Loudoun County has done and VDOT has done on Route 7, it takes 5 minutes longer for you to go to Leesburg from the airport than it does for you to go down the Greenway. And the state troopers are all over that thing. But they're not on Route 7, except in one little spot. There's a Loudoun County Sheriff's Deputy. So you can speed on Route 7 and 28 now. North of the airport, of course, a lot of growth, a lot of industry, hundreds of high bay warehouses and things like that. But take a look, this is South Riding, right? It's 4,600 acres, 6,200 homes, huge, okay? Broadlands, Cascades, these are massive communities. Lansdowne is now being developed, Leisure World. Lerner opens up Dulles Town Center Mall in 2001. And then you get a whole bunch of corporate campuses coming out to Loudoun. The Lorton Prison, which staved off a lot of development as well in the southern part of Fairfax County because it was only known for the prison and it was known for the landfill. That closes in 2001 as well, and almost immediately a lot of land is gobbled up for development. Lorton Station along the VRE is opened up. You get the Springfield-Franconia Parkway being completed in 1998. The Joe Alexander Transportation Center, also known as the Franconia Springfield Metro Station and VRE Station and Greyhound Station, is opened up. My wife is from Columbia, South Carolina, okay? She moved up here in 2001 to work for the White House. She remembers leaving Columbia and with her dad, and if any of y'all have been to Columbia, it's about the same size, a little bit bigger than Manassas. It's an extremely hot place, okay? She remembers distinctly hitting the HOV lanes right around the time that the lights just sort of pop on, probably around like 6 o'clock at night. And she said to herself, I've made it. Like, I've left Columbia, I'm going to the big city, and I just want to let you know, Prince William County gave her that impression, and you all should be happy with that. And of course, this is what it looks like in the summer. Everyone loves that. Again, I-66, we all remember the widening, some of us do, from 4 lanes to 8 lanes. It occurs in the late 1990s for I-66. 1997, Dulles or National Airport's completed. That's the best little airport. It really is a lovely time. The Western Transportation Corridor that's supposed to run between Falmouth, Stafford area, all the way up to Route 7 is killed by the General Assembly in 2001. Going to run through this real quick. Oh, well, Prince William County downzones 1998, the western portion of its county into 10-acre lots. You can see it in the beige there. Loudoun County decides to downzone its area in 2003 into 10 and 20-acre lots. If you take a look at all the different comprehensive plans and the zoning regimes across the Piedmont area between Northern Virginia and basically Charlottesville, which is off the map, what I did was I took a look at them and I said, okay, what areas of these counties are 1 acre, require at least an acre of zoning or more? Like, you can't build townhomes or anything like that. Those are the areas that are shown in red, okay? The areas that are in white, you have to have at least an acre. So if you think it's expensive to live where we live right now, just imagine what happens after Western Prince William builds out. It's going to be extremely expensive because while we are in one sense preserving beautiful Western Northern Virginia, in the other sense you are reducing the available supply of land for development, and those growth pressures happen. So what you're starting to see, and you see it in Prince William too, you're starting to see Loudoun and Fairfax especially start emulating some of Arlington's growth patterns and start going vertical and making higher and better use of land. A lot of stuff happens with the BRAC closures from Crystal City and Alexandria. Fort Belvoir in the early 2000s, starts attracting more jobs. The Engineering Proving Grounds, National Geospatial Agency locates there. Woodrow Wilson Bridge was originally built in 1969 to carry about 80,000 cars a year or cars a day. By 1995, it's carrying 3 times that amount. Something had to be done. Maryland and Virginia work together. Maryland starts constructing the Woodrow Wilson Bridge, which is pretty remarkable. When you come across the bridge, there's a whole revamped interchange for Alexandria. I don't care what you remember from this lecture, but many of you all remember that in the late 80s, early 90s, every single afternoon drive program on the air would start off with traffic reports about the Springfield interchange, okay? Every single one. It was carrying way too much traffic, and over an 8-year period, they rebuilt it into a huge stacked interchange, which now really doesn't back up all that much, although getting to it is kind of scary sometimes going north on 95. The first phase of the Silver Line opens in 2014, going through Tyson's Corner out to Reston. Fairfax County decides that what they're going to do, they've seen the error of their ways. We're going to take that area between the 2 roads, flanking the toll road in Reston, and we're going to rezone all of that for mixed-use development, just like Arlington County. And you see that popping out of the ground today. Here's Reston, looking at the town center area. And this is what it looks like, the toll road heading on out there. Tyson's Corner, for the very first time, anathema to earlier boards of supervisors, Fairfax County said, unlimited density, we're not going to have any parking required around any of these metro stations for the 4 stations in Tyson's Corner. And we want to convert it into, there's 20,000 people that live there today, and there's about 100,000, 150,000 people that come there every day to work, and they come at the exact same time, they leave at the exact same time. We want to have 100,000 people living there by 2050. And so what they want to do is totally go vertical. It's going to be remarkable. They've adopted an entire grid network to change what's, on the left is what's there today, on the right is what they hope to build. Things are coming down. That NADA building, gone. I-66 is widened out. You all might remember at Haymarket, the converging, diverging interchange. There's the railroad crossing on Route 29 at Gainesville. But yeah, that's pretty remarkable at 15 and I-66. I-95, hot lanes open up. I-95, they open up. And I got to be honest, the one thing they should have done is had 2 permanent reversible lanes rather than having that thing shut down for hours at a time where everyone's just stuck in traffic. You should have bit the bullet. Route 7, they opened up all the interchanges. Just to zoom through this. Data centers. You all know about data centers in Prince William? Yeah, I think so. I know about that. We have 70% of the world's internet traffic flowing through Northern Virginia. Nothing more needs to be said about all the controversy and everything like that. These are just developments in Loudoun County. Western Prince William County, here's what it looked like in the 1980s. Linton Hall Road, Wellington Road, and of course, here's what occurred, right? All the growth. Vint Hill is kind of the line. Many of you all know this, right? At Linton Hall Road, Bristow Road, the widening of Route 28. Route 15, south of Haymarket, widened by the developer there, Equinox Investments. We were just talking about Bristow Station, which is a lovely little battlefield park, about 100 acres. That was a proffered commitment from the developer to the county to create a Civil War park, if they could allow the development there in sort of a clustered fashion, versus just spreading it out over the full 200 acres. And here is what that area looks like over Haymarket and what became of the Disney's America Land. This is what it looked like before, and of course now this is what it looks like. And again, the question is, which one is better? We all know Dominion Valley, et cetera. Lake Manassas is developed. You got the Wegmans, which we all love. You have Robert Trent Jones Country Club. I mean, what's happened in Prince William is pretty incredible. Potomac Town Center off of I-95 does not have a PF change yet, I don't think, but probably will in the future. And then you have the Cherry Hill Peninsula, it's sort of the last undeveloped peninsula being developed, east of, or just, over near Dumfries. You have a new town center that's popped up on Fort Belvoir on Post. A lot of new growth. Loudoun is going vertical with their stuff. What ended up happening in the shopping bag building, eventually it was, developed out into what became known as Tyson's Town Center. Fairfax County, this is the Vienna Metro Station, sort of created a mini town center around what used to be a whole bunch of parking lots. You've been to Fairfax Center, right by the Fairfax County Government Center where the Coastal Flats is. There it is. Mosaic District, a place where you used to get your car windshield replaced in Merrifield, is now a very successful redevelopment story. All the old historic cities and areas, Delray, Manassas, all of these areas are really coming alive again. Columbia Pike, a lot of zoning and stuff like that. Downtown Manassas is looking fantastic. Downtown Fairfax, who knew? Downtown Falls Church is coming out of the ground too. This is what they had with Springfield Mall, what they wanted to do. This is Westfield. They decided to add a Wegmans there, add some retail, add some residential to add some vitality to it. Route 1 corridor in Fairfax County, they have adopted plans for BRT, bus rapid transit, coming through there. A lot of the, Fairfax County's population in the eastern portions has decreased in terms of school population. The county held on to all those buildings, converted them into community or administrative centers, and they're glad they did because now that area is booming again with kids as people move back inside the Beltway. So they're converting a lot of these old schools that were built in the 50s and 60s back into brand spanking new schools. I'm getting close. I'm sorry. If you need to leave, I'm sorry. I'll be done in just a second. My old geography professor and historic political science professor, Mary Washington, put this map together after the, what was this, the 2000 and whatever election was, just a couple years ago. And this shows the voting prowess of Northern Virginia relative to the rest of the county, or rest of the state. And so, even though Craig County and Russell County and Tazewell County and Lee County might be solid Republican, counties by number, the people live in the urban areas. And you can see which way things are going politically and why the rest of downstate Virginia has an issue with Northern Virginia and in particular Fairfax County, just because it just outweighs everything, right? And of course, we got this a whole bunch of tech out here from all the counties. We're all into high tech, and we all came together to create a Northern Virginia Economic Development Alliance because we were tired of fighting each other for economic development things like Fairfax or like Amazon. So this is very innovative. That all these counties are not going to compete as much of each other when we talk about getting new jobs and stuff. And here's the Amazon campus when it gets finally constructed in Crystal City. The last slide I have right here, finally at long last, everyone can wake up. When you leave Bethesda, when you come in on the Beltway and you're heading towards the American Legion Bridge towards Tyson's, and you're in Maryland, the control sign, the control city on this, which is what's on the green side city, it's not Richmond, it's not Fredericksburg, it's Northern Virginia, okay? This is what we've created as a region, right? And we should all be damn proud to live here. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to you. Happy to answer any questions, but I love this stuff, so thank you.